So we want to compute a weighted average. And in this scenario, we will compute a weighted average, assuming that we're students in a class. So in this class, we have a set of assignments. And then for each assignment, we will receive a grade that is a score between 0 and 100%. And then for each grade, we'll have a weight because let's say we have a big project that is worth more than an individual quiz. So let's do a little bit of formatting. I'm going to double click the lines in between my columns to get the formatting the way that I want it. I'm going to, shade my labels and things like that just to make it a little bit more readable. And then I want everything to kind of be center aligned as we work through this. So let's see here. So we have, and actually I'm going to make these a little bit bigger so that we can see everything properly. Okay, so for assignments, we have, let's say, a large course project, and that it's worth, let's say it's worth a quarter of our grade, so 25% of our grade. Let's say then too that we have a final exam, and that final exam is worth as much as the project. So half of our grade is really determined by these two assignments. But then let's say we also have weekly assignment 1, weekly assignment 2, and let's say we have a class that is 5 weeks long, right? So we have a weekly assignment 4 and then a weekly assignment 5. Okay. And so the weight for each of these weekly assignments, let's say, is 5%. And so over these 5 weeks, we will have another quarter of our grade, the sum of each of these 5 weekly assignments. And then last but not least, we have 25% of our grade left. Let's say we have a couple of quizzes. We have quiz 1, we have quiz 2, and each of these quizzes, let's say, is worth 12.5% of our final grade. So I'll say 12.5%, and we'll copy that down. So if I've done this correctly, the sum of my weights should be 100%. Now, this is important because if the sum of our weights is anything less than 100%, then we will not get a complete picture of our final grade. And if it's more than 100%, that would almost be assuming that we're making extra credit. And so 100% is the final score that we can have for the class, as the class would be based on 100% of the activities and assignments that we complete. All right. And so now let's grade each of our assignments. And let's say we are superstars as we set up our equation and we earn 100% on our project. We earn 100% on our final exam. And really, we earn 100% on every single assignment in the course. Okay. So we have a total of 9 assignments, each with different weights, and we've scored 100% on each of those assignments. And so because I have scored, and this is kind of the simplest case, because I've scored 100% on each assignment, I would assume or expect for my final grade to be 100%. And so as we build an additional formula for a weighted average, we will keep this in mind. So our expectation, which I'll just write here as we expect the output in this case to be 100%. Okay. And so this is our assumption for this case. But let's go on ahead and actually compute this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an additional column, and I'm going to call it my weighted grade. Okay. Now the weighted grade, I'm going to do a little bit of formatting, and I'm just going to copy this format painter here and make sure that it has the same look and feel as the rest of the table. And so what this weighted grade will tell me is really if I multiply my grade by my weight, I will get the portion of my final grade that is for this assignment. Okay. And so that means that I'm going to take my grade and I'm going to multiply it by my weight, and then I'm going to press enter. And so for this project assignment, my weighted grade is 100% of the 25% weight, and therefore my weighted grade is 25%. Okay. And so I'm going to do this very same thing here for my final exam. So my final exam is 100% because I am a superstar. And I'm going to multiply that by the weight, which is 25%. And lo and behold, my weighted grade is 25% once again. And if I copy this formula down by dragging and dropping the formula over the range of cells that are in my table, I see that basically my output is is equivalent to my weights. And that is because each of my grades is 100%. But that won't always be the case. And so let's take a look at what that means. So as a checker, let's create at the end of this table, we'll create a total. Okay. And so I'll call this my total score. And the grade, we don't care about a total. The weight, we can just double check that the sum of our weights is 100%, which is good. And then our weighted grade, we will also check that what our total grade is based on our weights. So this really is how we validate that our assumption is correct. And in this case, it is. So I'm going to get rid of this because now we're going to assume that we made a few mistakes, right? So we're learning, and let's say on our weekly assignments, let's get rid of these grades. Let's say on our weekly assignments, we do less than perfect. So on one assignment, we get an 88%. On another assignment, we get a C, a low C. And then on our weekly 3 assignment, we aced it. On our weekly 4 assignment, we failed. And then we did relatively well on our weekly 5 assignment, right? And so as you can see, our weights for these grades in each case only equal the weight that's assigned to the grade when the grade is perfect, but then we get some fraction of the weight when our grade is less than perfect. Okay. So overall, for these 5 assignments, we have achieved 20.15% in the course. Let's say we really do a great job on our project and we score 100%. And on our final exam, we learned a lot from our weekly assignments and our score ends up being 98%. So here too, you can see that because we have achieved a grade of 100% on our project, our weight is 25%, and therefore 25% of the course points are earned. We lose a half of a point in our final grade because our final exam is not perfect, but it's pretty close. And then for our quizzes, let's say we did well on those and we got 85% in each case. And so now we can see that even with a couple of really poor assignments, so a failing grade here and a 70% low C here on our weekly assignments, we still can earn above a 90% in the course. And that has to do with the course weights, right? So we did really well on those assignments that are worth a greater portion of our grade. And therefore, our grade is weighted very highly. All right. So let's say now that we do a scenario where we ace everything in our course. Whoops, I want to do paste values. And let's say we fail our project because let's say we cheated our way through our exams. We cheated our way through our weekly assignments by copying off of somebody else. And same thing for the quizzes, but it's kind of hard to cheat on a project. So let's say that we got a 50% there. Then the final exam, we also did quite poorly. Well, even though we did super duper well on all of the course assignments and quizzes, we did not do well on our project and final exam, which made up half of our grade. And so our final grade is no better than a C. So this is ultimately how you compute a weighted average using Excel. The keys that you want to keep in mind are that the sum of your weights should be 100% always, right? So let's say we made a mistake and made our final exam worth 10% of the grade. Well, this 67.5% is not an accurate representation because our total is less than 100%, right? And so the total should always be 100%. And let's say instead that we did 25 plus 15 is 40%. So now our total weight again is 100%. So that's the key thing to keep in mind. And then, of course, our calculation of the value for each assignment or component should be multiplied by the weight. And then those items should be summed in order to give you your total weighted grade at the end. One final thing that we'll want to do is to compare our weighted average with our unweighted average. And to make this very clear, I'm going to basically copy and paste the weighted grade and then delete this so that we can fill it with what we actually want. And so we'll have an unweighted grade in column F. Okay. And so if this is our weighted grade, our unweighted grade would really be just the average of grade, assuming that the project, the final exam, all of the weeklies, and the quiz were all equivalent in their weight, right? So each one is 1/9 of the total grade for the class. Okay. So in essence, the unweighted grade for each item would be equivalent to the grade itself times 1/9. Or, and actually I'll create another column and this will be I'm going to create a weight. I'm going to call it an unweight. And so that we can compute very similarly how we computed the weighted grade, we'll call it an unweight. And so the unweight in this case will really just be 1/9. So 11.11%. And, behind that are, an infinite number of ones. But for each of these items, we will copy and paste down this formula. And the reason I'm using 1/9 is because we have 9 assignments, right? So we have a count of 9, meaning we have 9 assignments. Okay. So if we were not using a weight at all, we would really just be averaging the grade. And so we would expect, our average to be 89% unweighted, right? And that would mean that the weekly 3, the weekly 4, the weekly 5 are all worth the same as the project and the final exam. And that's what this unweight gives us. And so, very similar to our weights that we used for our weighted grade, the sum of our unweights should equal 100%. So I'm going to do equals sum to validate this. And the sum of my unweights should equal 100%. All right. And so for unweighted grade, we will compute this the same way. So it will be our grade times our unweight in this case. And so the 50% that we scored on our project is going to equal an output of 5.56% of our unweighted final grade. And similarly, we'll take our grade, multiply it by our unweight. And so you can kind of get the idea of what we're doing. We'll copy this formula down as well. And in each of these cases, we scored 100%, and all of our unweighted grades are presented here. And so our sum of our unweighted grade will be the sum of the unweights. And that gives us 88.89% or 89%, right? Which is the unweighted sum of grade. And really, if you've watched this average down here at the bottom of the screen, if we increase our decimal places, we get exactly the 88.89% that we see here. So does this make sense, right? If we are comparing, let's say, our weighted grade total, so this is what we would score in the class if we followed this weighting scheme, versus our unweighted grade, which is what we would score in the class if all of the assignments and projects and exams and quizzes were worth the exact same. This would be ultimately, we would have a higher grade. And the reason for that in this scenario is because we scored more points on, or a higher grade on those assignments that, when weighted, are de-emphasized in terms of the final course points. All right, so one final thing that I'd like to point out. So now we understand really the math or the computation behind the weighted grade and how it differs from an unweighted average, right? So a weighted average versus an unweighted average. There's an additional Excel formula that I would like to introduce, and it is called SUMPRODUCT. And ultimately, what SUMPRODUCT does is it does all of the math and the summing. So the multiplication and the summing. So the sum and the product, which is the multiplication result. And it does it all in one step, right? And this is looking at an array of data, which is, all of the values for grade, all of the values for weight, and all of the values for weighted grade. So it's doing all of the math and then it sums it all up in one cell. So we know that for weighted grade, we multiplied grade times weight, and then we summed all the weights to get 75%. So let's use SUMPRODUCT to generate the same. I guess it helps if I actually type it correctly. So to generate the same output. So we're summing the product of array 1, which let's look at the formula. Array 1 tells us ultimately the arrays that you want to multiply and then add the components, right? And all of the arrays must have the same dimensions. So in terms of updating array 1, we want to multiply our grade, right? So all of the values for grade, not including the title. And then I'll say comma. Then the second piece that we would like to multiply are all of the values for weight. And we can validate here. We go from row 3 in each case to row 11. And then behind the scenes, these values will be multiplied and then summed. So I'm going to press enter. And we can see that the result is 0.75, or if we change the formatting of this cell, we're looking at 75%, exactly the same. And in this case, and I'll be very explicit about this, so SUMPRODUCT again here. And the two arrays that we would like to multiply are the grade, again, from rows 3 through 11 in this case, and then the unweights. And that will give us 88.89%. And I will do the formatting. And this is my validation, right? So now you understand SUMPRODUCT as well as how that actually works in terms of your weighted grade, your unweighted grade, and hope to see you in the next one.